This is Firemans Run, Stage 7. The Stage 5 pass of this was cancelled. So yeah, Stage 7. Then we're on to service, 45 minutes. Then we get to run the fun 14-mile stages. Are we better? So for those in camera land, YouTube world, I don't know. Anyway, 200 left 6 into right 6 over crest 70, right 5 minus over crest down 180. And he should floor it to the right 5 minus over crest down. Hey!
Hey, 1408 start.
Yep. And then he should floor it from there to the chicane.
Well, now you put me on the spot.
So if he does not...
You can downvote me on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just leave some comment about him
being a pussy driver.
lifting or something.
Please don't. You can vote the co-driver out of the car, by the way.
We're gonna have a poll after this to see. Okay, we're armed. "15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Left 6 into right 6 over crest 70. Right 5 minus over crest down. 180. Right 6 over flat small jump. Go, go, go. You're lifting. 120. Flat small crest 70. Right 6 over flat small jump. 450. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Chicane right entry. Go, go, go. You're lifting.
Shut up.
Left 4 over crest long, 70. Flat jump, 200. Turn right 1 plus around barrels. Here's your right one. Right 6, 70. Left 6 long. Right 6 plus 300. Go, go, go. Left 6 plus 50. Left 5 plus. Into right 6 plus 250. Repeat, left 5 plus. Into right 6 plus 250. Right 6 into flat crest 200. Repeat, right 6 into flat crest 200. Go, go, go. Small crest into right 5 plus 100. Stay mid over small crest 50.
Next.
Right 5 plus over crest tiny. Kinks 250. Left 4 minus slippy 120. Turn right 4 minus late long. Go. 450. Repeat 450 over double small crest. Left 5, 100. Caution, stay right over small crest 20, chicane right entry. Chicane right entry. In and over the crest. There you go. Left 5 over flat crest 200.
There's a camera on the chicane.
Yeah. Right 6 plus. Left 6 plus 180. Go, go, go. Left 5 minus no cut, go. Go, go, go. Repeat, left 5 minus no cut, go. 300.
Next.
Small crest, stay mid. 120, chicane, right entry. Go, go, go.
There's a
100.
chicane.
Flat, small jump, 150. Go. Flat, small crest, 100. Flat, long crest, 300. Right 6 plus. Into small, flat, small crest. Into flat, small crest again, 250. Keep it in. Left 5 plus, very long go. Flat, small crest, 200. Repeat, flat, small crest, 200.
Next.
Flat, small crest,
Next.
200. Stay right over small crest, 70. Small crest, left 6 over small jump, 100. Caution crest into right 6 plus short, into jump down, into left 6. Repeat, right 6 plus short, jump down, and left 6. Right 5 minus, 50. Finish, 100. Left 5 plus over small crest, you're done. Good job.
Well done.
Oh, we definitely beat a 60 mile an hour average. We did 64 average, 88 max. Hey guys!